So in addition to doing Kodály and fire oven techniques in my classroom, I heard about the ORF workshop that they had on election day here, and I was very interested in that. So I actually got some really great pictures that I ended up using for the presentation. How handy. All right, so today we're going to be talking about hauling and heaving shanty comparisons between Halyard, short drag, Capstan, and Pump Chanteys. And I found this quote and I really liked it as far as work songs unite the muscle and sinew of laboring men into a concerted effort. And that kind of brings us, that's the whole point of this exercise. I know everybody in here is probably very well acquainted with shanties, so we'll go through a brief history. I might make it even briefer than I had planned. So we don't really know when exactly or where exactly they started. We know that there were rowing songs in the 14th and 15th century. We know that there were sing-out references in manuscripts from regarding a voyage in the year 1400, and these sing-outs were the wild yells seamen would raise when hauling a rope hand over hand, a sort of embryo shanty. So going way back to the beginning. And speaking of way back to the beginning, some of the oldest ones that we know of, at least in my research, Haul the Ballin, a Roving, and Whiskey John. So they said that Haul the Ballin might be older, since that's about when square-sailed ships took place of the oared lateen galleys, and that was the most important line on a ship. There's less developmental history after that. There's a bit of a pause due to war. Unfortunately, England and France were at war for the better part of the 18th century, and there were different rules aboard the naval ships. We don't really have any written references to shanties until the 1830s and the 1840s again, because some of those rules on the ships, it was very different in the Navy. They have what is called the silent routine, and the men fall back upon their ropes in silence, like a lot of soldiers when the bosun pipes. And Masefield said, "It must be very horrible to witness." And at this time, merchantmen were being sailed like men of war, and many merchant sailors were seized by press gangs, which robbed the commercial ship of good shantymen, and their place was taken by landsmen and foreigners who knew nothing about and cared less for these traditional work songs, as Stan Hugo tells us. And as the age of sail came to an end, well, hang on, let's get to the golden age first. There was a boom after the wars were done, and after a boom comes a bust. So we had most progress in shanty development from the 1820s to the 1830s. And there were few new shanties after about the 1860s, though there were still variations being created after that. The tasks changed with the new naval technology. For example, once we had iron hulls, didn't have to pump as much, because if you had to pump and your ship was made of iron, you really wouldn't have to pump very long, because it's crappy. And unfortunately, as the tall ships died out, so did most of the shantying. And here we have a picture from the Great Lakes, and this is an example of a jackass or a Grand Haven rig, where if it breaks, it's not really worth fixing anymore, so they went, meh, good enough, we'll kind of turn it into a barge as we can. And it was just kind of sad to see from the golden age and these beautiful large ships to, okay, well, that one's only got 2 masts, that one's only got 1, take them all off, we're just going to tow this thing around. Getting into some sailors and their songs. Musically, shanties are the most valuable, showing how much they are characteristic of their subject. Vocationally, as proving the amount of impetus or encouragement needed by the singer in his work. And poetically, by making known the feelings which animate a sailor's breast with regard to his home, his wife, his captain, and indeed all that concerns him. The acculturation that occurred across the cruise really mixed things together with the different nationalities that we had. For example, in American Deepwater Cruise, we had New Englanders, we had English, Scotch, German, French, African, we had South Sea Islanders, and there were also checkerboard crews of mixed race. At this time, some slaves were hired out to the mercantile marine in the winter because they were too costly to support in the winter months. But as these different cultures came together, they really intermingled, especially when it came to their chanting between the singing styles and the lyrics and the different songs that came about. So as the result, we can't really tell, this is exactly where this came from, this is exactly where that came from. Folksal ballads do tend to be more nation-specific, although there is still some British, Irish, and American sharing there because of languages. When we're talking about where everybody was sailing to and mixing between ports and hopping from one to another, these are some of the major sailing routes of the clipper ship era. So you can see all over various places where all the deep water sailors would go. And then as somebody, bless you, as somebody from the Great Lakes, I also did some research earlier on in my master's on some of the Great Lakes sailing songs, and I found that a lot of deep water sailors, if they wanted to be home for the winter, or if they wanted to not be gone for 5 years, they would stick around and kind of do the Great Lakes stuff, and then during the winter time they would be able to do logging and lumber trades, or go down to the Gulf and do cotton, things like that. It's also how other work songs began to be implemented across between land jobs and sea jobs. Different influences on shanties. They were created all over the world, as we just discussed. The first shanties were sing-outs and hauling cries. And then they were developed further, put into use in different shipboard contexts, and mixed with other origin points to develop the shanties that we know today. Musical influences are many. There were existing folk songs from around the world. Different professions, again, talking about lumbermen, cotton loader, different, the word I'm looking for is stevedores down in the Gulf port. Different emigrant sailors, African-American work songs, just kind of mixing those things together. As far as language goes, some words worked better than others, whether due to vowel shape or connotations. So they mixed some foreign words in with the sailor's native tongue. That was pretty common. And it didn't have to make sense necessarily, as long as there was rhythmical flow of united words and melody. So as long as it's musical is what it mattered. As far as some words working better than others, Walton and Grimm quoted Carl Joyce as saying, "Hang was the best pullin' word in the language, especially on a downhaul." And as I get to the different shanties that I analyzed for this paper, there was definitely a theme when it came to the hauling shanties, particularly the short drag. There was a lot of haul this, haul that, haul you, haul them. Just kind of keeping that going. They must contain good mouth-filling words with the vowels in the right place and the rhythmic ictus at a proper distance for just ahead to keep true time. Described in 1888, that's not too shabby. So the topics, lyrically, were very vast. Pretty much anything you could come up with, singing about women, singing about alcohol, singing about ships, mates, Shanghai, irrelevant things, people, legendary, real, doesn't matter, places, etc. Now, some collectors said there were no obscenities. I thought that was really cute of them to do that, and there were many, many verses that were redacted when I was looking, and it was like, well, we only put the clean ones, and I'm like, but I want to see the other ones. Nobody writes them down, and then we can't find them again. I'm a little frustrated about that. Others said there were obscenities when there weren't civilian passengers around. You gotta keep it PC for those people. Hugel said there was an art to the amount of double entendres used. I agree with that as well. And J.C. Colcord said lyrics weren't always appropriate, but it was a jovial, forthright, almost wholesome obscenity. That's how I live my life. Different musical aspects. It varied somewhat between subgenres. The melody is the thing, and it's marked by the slow, steady rhythm of men at work. In addition to that, they were typically sung in unison, although mixed race crews often incorporated harmony. And then as I learned when I was here for the election day workshop, that wasn't necessarily just a mixed race crew thing. It was just a musical thing that people did. Yes? Oh, sorry, I thought you had a question. Okay, I was a little confused. Sometimes they were accompanied earlier on when there were more hands on deck by an accordion or by a fiddle. But as the technology changed and they needed fewer hands on deck, unfortunately you couldn't just be the shantymen, you also had to do other work as well, which sometimes resulted in, okay, I'm putting in half effort here because I'm leading you guys, or just kind of riding the bars on the capstan so that I can have enough breath to lead this exercise. And then as a result of not necessarily being able to play and accompany themselves, they were accompanied only by the thrilling shrouds, the booming double bass of the hollow topsails, and the multitudinous chorus of ocean, according to Smith in 1888. Thought that was poetic. Different subgenres by function. Depending on the collector, they divided them differently. Most of them did hauling and heaving. Some put other categories. Short drag was often set as another. We also had Macefield went through and said sheet, tack, bowling shanties, and runaway chorus, and stamp and go and walk away. He kind of said that was a bastardized version of shanties that didn't really fit anywhere else. But for this paper, I used Stan Hugel's subgenres. It just made it a little bit easier. In his preface, he stated, "I find it too dogmatic to state that this shanty is a capstan or that a Halyard song. Different ships, different long splices," is what he said sailors would say. So some of these might be like, oh, well, you could use it for this thing. Yep, you could. Go for it. Have fun. No limitations. So for the hauling songs, we had Halyard shanties for topsails and topgallants, short drag for topgallants and royals, sweating up, foresheet, or bowline shanties for boarding tacks and sheets, etc. Bunting, so stowing your sail, hand over hand, walk away and stamp and go like drunken sailor. And then heaving were more of a continuous process versus the intermittent operation of the hauling shanties. So we had our main capstan or windlass songs, we had our capstan songs for hoisting sails or other very heavy things, and pump shanties. And there was a lot of overlap between pump shanties and windlass shanties in my research, so that could be a future topic. And then we also there's one shanty done for amusement for the little dead horse ceremony, but then that got absorbed into the hauling category once that ceremony kind of went by the wayside. And one non-working shanty, since shanties were such an essential part of sailing, that there was even a shanty for doing nothing at all, just to keep men involved. As far as Halyard shanties go, and a picture from Election Day workshop, fun times, a slow hauling motion, 4-bar stanzas, alternating solo and chorus lines, so call and response. Most frequently sung subgenre of shanty, and sometimes includes the walkaway chorus, runaway chorus, stamp and go chorus, whichever you would like to call it, drunken sailor. Short drag were for more of, this is the oldest kind of work song, nearly 500 years old, related to the sing-out, when you just need a few good pulls. Sung less frequently than the other 3 subgenres discussed today, because again, it's kind of towards the end of the process when you're almost done with that. And then we have the few good pulls reference. The capstan shanties are one of our heaving shanties. They were smooth and continuous work, so it was a smooth and continuous kind of song with the rhythm. And most of them had a solo verse followed by a chorus of several lines. For heaving, we also have the pump chanteys. Not so strict in form, any quick, lively tune to which you might work a fire engine will serve for the music of a pumping song. Sometimes it even included folk soul and shore songs, so it was kind of less strict. One of my favorites in my research was Leave Her Johnny, and I found a great video of Stan Hugel singing that here at Mystic, and it actually kind of got me through finishing my master's capstone as I was coming up with the various woes of the process. Now, the shantymen themselves, Stan Kugel said, "It was the bloody nightingale aboard this packet," might be one way that the shantymen could be self-appointed. Basically, whoever started singing when somebody asked for a song. No musical training was required other than first-hand shantying experience. He was usually an older hand, a good seaman, one with an extensive repertoire, a retentive memory, and a good, powerful voice, who would automatically take his position as shantyman on sailing day at the Capstan. Sometimes there'd be two, one on each watch, and he was essential to the easy working of the ship. And at some times, even if you were not the world's best sailor, if you were the world's best shantyman, you might still get a job. So it was a very important skill to have. The musical style was very unique, not easily notated, especially some of the hitches and the grace notes, the shrill breaks in the voice. He flung his voice aloft like a bird to reach a high note, soaring above it, then swooping down on it with an effortless precision, a careless, jubilant swoop and swing that was irresistible. Untaught and without rules except those of custom, he could perform feats of vocalization which were a sheer joy to the listener, is how Joanna Colcord described it. And she grew up, her father was a captain, and she grew up mostly on his ship. So it was really interesting to see her perspective on some of these things. They could fit extra syllables in without losing the musicality of the line, without screwing everybody up with the job that they were doing. I teach elementary music. It's interesting sometimes the differences between children and adults with, we can fit in a few more words, and okay, we're learning how to push things a little faster to make it fit 4 beats. Often improvised verses as necessary. If, okay, we're finishing up a little early, wrap it up, or okay, we can string it out and make it last a little longer. If there's a new crew, they might sing the chorus as an introduction, get everybody on board, make sure that they're working with the same song, especially for the hauling shanties. And the crew didn't need to be artful, they just needed to be beatful. So the Fire Robin music education is tuneful, beatful, artful. So your shantyman has to be tuneful, they have to carry a tune, right? They have to be beatful, have that steady beat, and artful, they're showing the expression of the music. The crew, that stuff, cool if they could, but if they weren't able to, that's okay, as long as they had the excitement and the oomph and they all stayed together, that's the point. It was a cacophony on larger ships with several smaller groups doing tasks, and I believe Adams, it was described, the songs which are unnameable, or in addition to the songs, are the unnameable and unearthly howls and yells that characterize the true sailor, which are only acquired by years of sea service. Each sailor has his own howl, peculiar to himself, but fortunately only one performs at a time on the same rope. The effect, however, when all hands are on deck at a time and a dozen ropes are pulled on at once, is most suggestive of Babel. So imagine the Tower of Babel, but on a ship. That was a very, very poignant picture there. Now, as part of my master's degree doing my Kodály certification, I took a folk song history and research class with Sister Lorna Zemke, and she taught us a very scholarly way of approaching these folk songs. So you're going to see some of this as far as like, when would you actually use this? And that's what we asked Sister Lorna too. And she said, well, if you're ever working at the Smithsonian, this is one of the ways that you would use that. So kind of going beyond the scope of what we need as elementary music teachers and digging in. So if you are up on your music theory, you're going to be right on board with me, and if you're not, it's okay, enjoy the ride. We're going to do an example analysis for Holloway Joe. I used the version from Walton and Grimm in Windjammers, Songs of the Great Lakes Sailors, and I have some small friends to sing it for you. These are some of my kindergartners. So you're going to see them hauling in different directions at first. Roll away together.
That's possible.
stuff to grown-ups, and I might be able to show it. And they might, they're very excited to be involved in this presentation. So I'll have to send an email to the parents and let them know today's the last day of school, so I'm kind of missing out on that. So standard analysis is our basic. Here's what we start with. We go through the tone set, which is using solfege to identify which pitches we are using, then using those tones to identify the scale, going through the range, so the highest note to the lowest note, the form as far as what is repeating, what is different, what is the same, cadence notes, so the end of each phrase, where is that landing melodically, number of verbal syllables per phrase, and then the number of bars per phrase. So, for our tone set, we look at, and I'm not going to go through every single baby step, but we look at our key. It's in O look, we've got G major, O look, that actually means E minor here. So we end on La, that is our tonic, so that is circled up there, as you can see. And then we can, from there, we can identify that this is an extended La pentatone. So we've got our La, Do, Re, Mi, Sol, La, Sol, Mi, Re, Do, La. That was terrible, hang on. La, Do, Re, Mi, Sol, La, Sol, Mi, Re, Do, La. There we go, Control S. The range we count as, if it's at tonic, that's 1, Arabic 1. Anything above is Arabic numerals, anything below is Roman numerals. So here we don't go below tonic. There were some subgenres that we did go below tonic quite a bit. The form, we see that it is repetitive, it's A, B, A, B. We've got that call and response, and it's the same melodic structure each time. And cadence notes, we end on a 7th scale degree, the next one we end on a 1, 7, 1. So it's a really strong dominant tonic progression. Number of verbal syllables, the A section is the same number of syllables every time, the B section is the same number of syllables every time, and we're in 4-bar phrases. Now the next thing that we do is interval sequence and frequency tables. So here we're looking through what is the exact interval between each of the notes. So if we're doing, here's our first line, for example. So we've got a perfect fourth, then a perfect prime, since that's the same note. Then we go down, and the ups and the downs don't matter, but we go down a perfect fourth, here we go. Okay, down a perfect fourth. Then up a minor third, you're going to notice I've got some numbers in subscript. Anything that is minor, we've got small. If I were writing it handwriting, it would just be a smaller number. Unfortunately, technology can't necessarily move. So we make it happen. And then we go right back down, and you can kind of go through line by line for the whole entire song. And I did 48 of these songs for this project. It was so fun. And then after that, you go through and you figure out the frequency of each of those. So we figure out we've got 8 perfect primes, we've got 14 major seconds, so that's mostly stepwise motion, 2 minor seconds, 8 minor thirds, 4 perfect fourths, 2 perfect fifths. So most of this, there aren't any octave leaps or anything. We're not talking about, really strong, amazing, world's best singers. We're talking about people who are doing a job and they need something to get the job done. So here's my list of shanties. I'm not going to read them all to you. Have a peek at all the hauling on the short drag. So I had 12 Halyard shanties, 12 short drag shanties, 12 Capstan shanties, and 12 Pump Chanteys, as far as our heaving ones go. You can tell a lot of our Capstan shanties, we've got some goodbye kind of themes or some coming home kind of themes. And then here we get into some of the results. So, as far as scale categories goes, we're going right back to that standard analysis when we went through the tone set and then we went through the scale. Over half the Halyard shanties are in some type of major key. The specific types include complete and incomplete major scales. Less than 1/10 of them used a minor scale, more specifically natural minor. Modal scales were 16.7%, including an equal number of Dorian and incomplete Dorian plus fa scales. So Dorian would be starting on the 2nd scale degree. The remaining 16.7% were pentatones, including an equal number of do pentatones and extended do pentatones. Extended being we get into a second octave, whether top or bottom. So here we have those breakdowns a little bit more beyond those major categories. For short drag shanties, we also see mostly major. Just under half of them were in a major key. This is mostly incomplete major scales, followed by an equal or smaller but equal amount of complete major scales and implied major scales. So we're missing the leading tone, or we have the leading tone, but we're missing a couple other things. It's an implied major. The remainder of them contain smaller tone sets, including various types of trichords, tetratones, so 3 notes, 4 notes, pentachords, and pentatones. Of these, most of them end on do as the tonic, a couple of them ending on re or la. So not necessarily here is a full scale, but here are a few notes, and the short drag shanties were definitely different in that regard. So here we have it broken down a little bit more. For capstan shanties, again, overwhelmingly major, and we've got incomplete major as well as major with a Lydian inflection. So Lydian would be starting on the 4th scale degree. The remainder is split between an incomplete natural minor scale and a do pentatone. So even once we break that one down a little bit more, most of it is complete major scales. Pump shanties, again, mostly major. Most of them are complete, smaller but equal amount are incomplete or implied. Some are modal, including Dorian and incomplete Mixolydian, so starting on the 5th scale degree. And there was only one pump shanty that used a pentatone, which is extended do pentatone. So here's that broken down a little bit more. Then if we get into a summary, so most of them were in major, as we all saw very clearly in blue, more so in the heaving subgenre. Everybody else had a pentatone in addition to minor and or modal scales. Short drag had the most pentatones and the most tone set variation. And when we get into a couple different other kinds of analysis, the short drag kind of was set apart as well. When we talk about range, here we have how much is the range, and then over on the side, I didn't blow it up because it's not the most important thing in the world, and you can kind of see the column that has an outline around it, that's tonic. Okay, so wherever your ending note is, that's what that is. And you can see how many of those songs, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 12 songs, how many of them go below tonic and how many of them go above tonic. And we have some that tonic is the highest note. We have some that tonic is the lowest note. And we have some that go all around, but end on tonic. Same with short drag. We can see our smaller ranges here, except for one that had a range of an 11. A little bit more of a stretch there. For our capstan shanties, we had a little bit larger of a range, especially compared to the short drag. And then the pump shanties, again, most of them, almost everything is larger than an octave. So in summary, most variation was in the short drag, again. Most hauling had a range of an octave or smaller, and most heaving had an octave or larger. And thinking about what job we're doing and continuous process, you can be a little bit more melodic and do a few more shading things in there. 2/3 of the heaving shanties have a range larger than an octave. Most of the tonic pitches were located in the beginning or the middle of the range. Of the 4 subgenres, short drag had more high-end tonic pitches, so we were singing lower and then we end a little bit higher, and pump shanties had the least. As far as form goes, we can talk about progressive form, so A, B, C, D, every line is different. We can talk about reverting form, where it's A, B, just kidding, we're going back and we're doing the A again, we revert back to that. Or we've got, let's see, do I even have any? I don't think I have many repeating ones. Most of these are call and response, which again fits the job that they're doing, form and function tied together. The only hauling shanty with a full verse and chorus was Drunken Sailor, our stamp and go example. And the heaving shanties had a bunch of call and response songs, but were more likely to contain a full verse and chorus compared to the hauling shanties. As far as number of total bars, Halyard shanties, most were 8 bars long. Short drag were shorter, Imagine that. It's like it's in a name or something. Heaving, the shortest was 8 bars, and the longest Pump Chanty was 24 bars. So again, long continuous process, longer continuous song. The number of phrases, most of them had a 4-bar phrase. And short drag, again, different. Some songs had only 2 or 3 phrases instead of 4. Number of syllables. There was a little bit of, very few had identical numbers in every single phrase, so we got a little variation from line to line. Short drag shanties had the smallest number of differences between phrase numbers of syllables, so the average number of differences from phrase 1, phrase 2, phrase 3, phrase 4 was 2.75. Halyard chanties had an average of 4.17 syllable difference from line to line. And heaving had the largest difference from line to line with an average of 5 differences. Intervallic categories. So when we talk about ascendancy and descendancy, ascendancy is here's what happened the most. Descendancy is here's what happened the least. So here we've got Halyard had major, short drag also major. So the major intervals, it was that's our most common way of moving from step to step, from note to note. Capstan, every single one of them was mostly major steps between. And Pump Chanteys almost evenly split between perfect and major. So perfect being perfect prime, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, and major, most of the things are major seconds, so that we're moving stepwise. Then we talk about descendancy, so what is the least common. Didn't have a lot of perfect or minor intervals in Halyard chanties, didn't have a lot of minor and short drag, didn't have a lot of perfect in Capstan chanties, though that was the only place that I found diminished intervals. And Pump Chanteys, not as many minor, but this was the only place that I found augmented intervals. A summary, and just kind of for comparison's sake between this slide and the next slide, you can see just how overwhelming the majority is. Look at all those major seconds. It's the really tall column for all of them. And then if we look at what's in descendancy, there's a little bit more variation. You can't say for sure, this one barely ever happens, because it doesn't necessarily line up that way. The largest interval in Halyard chanties was a perfect fourth or a perfect fifth, short drag, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, Capstan and Pump, again, perfect fourth. The smallest interval, perfect prime, so we just stayed on the same note. If we're looking at the frequency of these, the things in blue are when we're moving in stepwise motion, so perfect prime, minor second, major second. The percentages in red are skipping, but a fifth or smaller, so we call that conjunctive motion, and that's minor third to a perfect fifth. And then anything that is disjunctive motion, which would be larger than a perfect fifth, is in yellow. As you can see, that doesn't really happen much in the Halyard chanties. Doesn't really happen much in the short drag chanties. Okay, lots and lots of stepwise motion. Capstan chanties, it happened twice, which was more than once, but still mostly stepwise motion. And a little bit more in the Pump chanties as well, but again, massive amounts of stepwise motion. So, conclusions and recommendations. In this collection, we found out that most things used major scales with a stronger majority in the heaving chanties. Short drag contained the greatest amount of variance in scales and range. Heaving tended to have a larger range, more than an octave. Hauling had an octave or smaller. Most of these were progressive in nature, so A, B, C, D. Some were reverting, A, B, A, B. Call and response is the most common form, and it was almost ubiquitous in the hauling chanties. Heaving also contained full verse and chorus. My recommendations for future research, I thought about doing that, and then I took a break. So an increased sample size would be really nice. I only had 12 songs from each of these categories. I don't really know how many more short drag I'd be able to find. I kind of exhausted what I was able to grab. It would be interesting to compare Pump Chanteys to Capstan and windlass chanties, since it's not always included as a separate subgenre in the collections. Comparing chanties with folksal ballads, that's actually how I got to this paper. When I had my Sister Lorna paper, as I call it, for my folk song history and research class, I was like, ooh, I've got a history of sailing in my family, particularly on my dad's side. That would be something neat to explore. and then I grabbed a bunch of songs and realized after I analyzed them all that, oh, well, I'm kind of comparing apples and oranges here. I've got some folksy ballads and some shanties, very different functions on the ship, and it would be interesting to see if they're very different musically, like I think all the numbers and the nerdy jargon would be. Comparing shanties with other kinds of work songs would be interesting as well, especially since so many of them kind of mixed and mingled as the workers mixed and mingled. Let's see. Yeah, when we're looking at all the data trends and their purpose aboard a ship, several of these trends make sense. Short drag shanties were short and needed to inspire a few good pulls, so the variants most likely increased interest and energy. Hauling shanties in general were meant to be call and response led by a shantyman. So their 4-bar sets of 2-bar phrases made a structure that was predictable and stable for any length of a pulling job, however long you had to string it out. Heaving songs were meant to make long, continuous jobs go by faster, so they weren't quite as regulated by the need to perform a short, strong, simultaneous action on the beat, like my kindergartners sort of did. The amount of conjunctive intervals, so again, perfect if they're smaller, particularly the stepwise motion, corresponds with the concept that steps are easier to sing than skips. And as sailors had neither formal musical training nor literary learning, the smaller intervals used in these songs made them easier to be sung well. If sailors were able to raise their voices as one, it likely made it easier for them to use their strength as one. This would have increased the shanty's effectiveness of bringing them together to accomplish various jobs. And I've got several references. If you want the full reference list, that's in the paper itself. This is only part of it. And if you want the full paper itself, I've got QR links to this presentation, the original ginormous paper, and a summary chart of the song collection and all the different analysis techniques. And if you need any of that emailed to you, my email address is just my first name and my last name at gmail.com. Ta-da. Questions? Oh, sorry. Yes?
Thank you so much for the presentation. I do have a question for you. You had mentioned that there were a number of these songs that were written just for fun. They weren't related to necessarily the use of the muscles and work. Did you do any analysis of those? And the other question is, related to that, are any of these shanties, even though the work is different, being written at the current time, or sung at the current time, out on these ships?
That would be a great question. I know in talking with some people who have done the tall ship sailing now, I don't know necessarily if when it's out on the water, if they're doing it. I know the Tall Ship Festival is coming to Green Bay, which my children were excited about when I said, if you want to go on these ships and talk to people who have sailed them, you can do that. As far as being used in actual working environments, I'm not sure. And as far as the shanty, the one that we found, or that was mentioned as just for fun and not having it, I was not able to find that one in particular, though that would be interesting as well. Yes?
One of the things that you did analyze are versions that you found in print.
Yes.
If you go to a 1920 version of the Shanty Book by Richard Runkleson and Terry, who was a musicologist and a hymn writer, did choral work, so he had a lot of creds. Was from Northumbria, and he does some analysis of L.A. Smith and Wall and other places, and then some that weren't mentioning because he grew up in Northumbria in a maritime environment and heard shanties from childhood. And when he's putting out his versions, he's stating quite clearly which version he heard from which shanty man, because they did. So it was a living form, which is now being fixed like a bug, a pin bug, and all the variants may possibly be lost. So a way to analyze that is to take the same song and find out how many variants you find of the song, and then come to some kind of conclusion if you can.
Yeah, that would be interesting as well. And when I was picking songs for my lists, I was also choosing which variation because some of them, like, here's this collection and we've got 5 versions of it here, we've got 3 versions of it here. And they're like, oh, so I was sitting in this nursing home and this guy forgot the words and another guy comes by and goes, oh, that one, and starts singing along in a little different way. So it's like, and there's another variation. So the joys of folk music and just kind of, yeah. Yes?
I'm just wondering, thank you for your details for the musical beats among us. Do you have any, did you calculate why so many were overwhelmingly in major keys?
I did not postulate anything on that.
Interval,
Just,
minor third was harder to sing? Or
yeah, I mean, my guess would be just that stepwise motion is generally easier to sing, and singing together and singing in tune. Beyond that, I don't know if there was official like thought process that went into it. Yes?
If you look at Kodály Emphasis in the Mediterranean, you'll find about no minor keys. Where did you get your master's, and what was the reaction when you said you were going to work in the sea shanty?
I got my master's at Silver Lake College in Manitowoc, Wisconsin. Very well known for their Kodály program. And Sister Lorna was really excited about me doing the Great Lakes shanties, and then when I said, hey sister, for my capstone, I'm going to dig deeper just into the shanties instead of like the folksy ballads mixed in with them too. And then when I gave my capstone presentation, we had 3 different prongs that we were supposed to do. So I had like a pedagogy prong, and I had a foundations of music education prong, and we had 15 minutes to present on all 3 of our things, and this was one of my things to fit into like 7 minutes that I kind of stole minutes from my other sections. And I brought in, I've got a model ship that my mom had given her dad for Father's Day, so I brought that in and I was like, okay, so here's this part, when we're talking about this, here's that. And people were amazed and they said, wow, some of them were like, I didn't even realize that there were this many different subgenres and this many different kinds. But as far as people actually understanding, like they got the music part of it, but the ship part of it, not as much. So when I told some of my friends in my master's cohort that I had applied for this and that I got accepted, their first reaction, love them dearly, but their first reaction was, oh, that's so exciting, somebody who actually cares about your paper. And then they're like, no, that's not what we meant, that came out wrong. They'll just understand it better. Yes?
Of those people you were just talking about, how many of them had a concept of work song?
They had the same concept of work songs. Like we had a basic understanding of that from our folk song history and research class, but as far as like the specific work that was done on a ship, I don't necessarily think that they had that
But they
concept.
understood using song and rhythm to get the
Yes,
job.
yes, yeah. All right, thank you very much. Good sing.
You don't have stuff, just words.
I'd like to thank Corinne Gallagher again for that paper. That was fascinating and a kind of analysis that I have not seen in the symposium. So it's something new after 40 years. Pretty cool. And